Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope everybody grabbed their water and is cooling off from that great workout by Andrew. Thank you so much. My name is Aaliyah Stevenson. I'm the Chief Programs Officer with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, and we are in our afternoon panel, our Power Hour TalkBack, claiming our power and building the future we deserve. And I'm honored today to share the stage with some folks that I consider colleagues, friends, sisters, partners in this movement. And so I am looking forward to introducing you to three amazing women, Angela Russell, Michelle Robinson, and Jackie Boggess. Let me just give you a little snippet, and that's all we really have time for in terms of these incredible women. I will begin with Angela Russell. Angela is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at CUNA Mutual Foundation, a CUNA Mutual Group. Angela is responsible for leading the development and implementation of short and long-term strategies and programs that support diversity and inclusion, along with overseeing CUNA Mutual's corporate social responsibility program. In 2018, Ms. Russell was named as one of the nation's most powerful diversity executives by Black Enterprise magazine. She has nearly 20 years of professional experience involving diversity and inclusion, external relations, outreach, communications, policy development, research, and evaluation. She has a master's in science and public health from the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, and a bachelor's degree of science in biochemistry from Beloit College. Thank you so much for being here, Angela. Also joining us today is Dr. Michelle Robinson. She is the Director of the Office of the Inspector General and the Equity and Systems Change Research and Policy Officer at the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Dr. Robinson provides strategic leadership and direction on internal and external equity and health equity initiatives, leading an internal health team, facilitating a cross-agency health equity team, and serving as the Vice Chair of the DCF Council designee for the Governor's Health Equity Council. This council is charged with creating a comprehensive plan that will achieve long-standing equitable health outcomes for all Wisconsinites. Prior to joining DCF, Dr. Robinson was a member of the award-winning Race to Equity project at Kids Forward. Welcome, Michelle. So excited to have you here. And we are joined by Jackie Boggess. Jackie is a lecturer on diversity, oppression, and social justice in the School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In the classroom, she challenges students to think about systems of race, class, gender, and more broadly and in greater depth than current popular models of difference and theories of discrimination and bias can accommodate. She's also a member of the NINA Collective, a cooperative consulting agency. She works with organizations, teams, individuals to determine why, whether, and how they intend to incorporate racial equity into who they are and how they work. She has also been a policy analyst and legal analyst focused on social welfare policy and practice. During her many years of work and study, she contributed to the national conversation on family support, income stability, intimate partner violence, and community violence. Welcome, all three of you, esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends to this conversation. I'm excited to jump right in. So we're going to kick it off right away with you, Angela, with our first question. The theme of this year's Black Women's Wellness Day is building the future that we deserve. And we spent the day up to now hearing from national and statewide leaders about the current state of Black women's health and well-being and where we need to go from here. It's been fantastic. We're on fire. We're so prepared for this conversation. We also introduced our preamble, as all of you have had the opportunity to review and to inform, in fact, on Black women's health in Wisconsin, which we entitled Black Women Deserve. And I just want to begin by let's level set. Why is this a critical conversation for us to be having right now as Black women here in Wisconsin and across the United States? And what are your thoughts and reactions, personally and professionally, around what Black women deserve and how we reach that pinnacle of equity, freedom, and well-being? We begin with you, Angela.
Hi, and thank you for having me on this panel. It's such an honor to join y'all on this group. And as I was kind of just sitting with this question, Well, number one, why? Because the survival of our nation and our state depends on it, number one. Duh, but people don't get that yet. And we are tired. We are so tired. So we have to figure out what it's going to take for all of us to live into our freedom, to be able to get to where we want to go. So, and when I think of this conversation about what Black women deserve, I think of things such as rest, restoration, and fortification. And so what y'all are doing with this conference is fortifying us so that we can keep going. And I'm going to curse for a second. Keep going and not cut a bitch, right? Because we don't want to do that. But am I keeping it too real already? All right. So, but when I was just sitting with this question, one of my favorite poems came to mind, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it. If y'all don't have this book, I highly recommend it. It's called This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color. It's incredible. And I'm just going to read it. It's called The Bridge Poem, because I feel like this resonates for our conversation. The Bridge Poem by Kate Rushin. I've had enough. I am sick of seeing and touching both sides of things, sick of being the damn bridge for everybody. Nobody can talk to anybody without me, right? I explain my mother to my father to my little sister to my brother, to the white feminists to the Black church folks, and the Black church folks to the ex-hippies, and the ex-hippies to the Black separatists to the artists to my friends' parents. And then I've got to explain myself to everybody. I do more translating than the goddamn UN. Forget it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of filling in your gaps. Sick of being your insurance against the isolation of your self-imposed limitations. Sick of being the crazy at your holiday dinners. Sick of being the odd one at your Sunday brunches. Sick of being the sole Black friend to 34 individual white people. Find another connection to the rest of the world. Find something else to make you legitimate. Find some other way to be political and hip. I will not be the bridge to your womanhood, your manhood, your humanness. I am sick of reminding you to not close off too tight for too long. I'm sick of mediating with your worst self on behalf of your better selves. I'm sick of having to remind you to breathe before you suffocate your own fool self. Forget it. Stretch or drown, evolve or die. The bridge I must be is to the bridge to my own power. I must translate my own fears, mediate my own weaknesses. I must be the bridge to nowhere but my true self, and then I'll be useful.
Woo! Yes, sick and tired of being the bridge for everybody.
For everybody.
It's resonating here in the chat big time, and needing to be the bridge to my own power, to my own self. Thank you,
Yes.
Angela. Okay, Michelle Robinson, same question for you. Why is this the critical conversation we need to be having right now? And what are your thoughts and reactions on what Black women deserve?
Yeah, man, hard to follow, Angela, of course. But as I was reflecting on this question, I just kind of landed on what's good for Black women is good for humanity. It's good for the world. Piggybacking on Angela, the reality is that on whatever metric you choose, just throw one out: economics, health, life expectancy. The U.S. is on a decline, and we're not just talking about Black women, we're talking about across groups. But of course, because we live in a white supremacist structured world and state and country, when that decline happens, we feel it more, we feel it harder. That impact's not only magnified for us, it reverberates. And so when I think about the critical juncture we are as a society, whether we're talking about democracy, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about just general health and wellness, it is essential right now that we figure this thing out. I really worry about the future. I worry about the next 10 years. I worry about our inability to move beyond white supremacy and racism in ways to see the ways that it is fracturing us as a society. It's not a zero sum. It's not just, we may feel the weight of the heel as people who are targeted by systems of oppression, but it impacts us all. And the fact that we haven't yet figured out that, it feels like we're being bamboozled as a society, right? There's something better that we can find, and there's something better that we all deserve. And Black women have been at it from the beginning, right? You know, whenever, you know, I'm a sociologist, and I often study, you know, economic structures and labor forces, and, you know, even having to constantly push at the narrative of when did women begin to work, right? Like, we've never not worked. We have been in the fields started in the fields alongside our men. Once we came out of slavery and Reconstruction and Jim Crow, we labored often in the homes as domestics of white people, where we were put at particular risk. We've experienced all types of abuses. And we still, despite the fact that we've made lots of gains in domains of education, in domains of income and all of that, we deserve so much more. And so when I think about what we deserve as Black women, I believe that we deserve the vision that we have for our country and our world, the best vision of it, that utopia. We deserve to have our needs met. We deserve to not have to exist in the struggle. We deserve to have a world where we can have trust in each other and faith in one another, and know that we can depend upon each other and see power in that. This culture of individuality that is so rampant in our nation impacts us, and, you know, we are really stronger together.
You said so many things there. One of the things that really resonated that Lisa Payton Care often says is that worry about the next 10 years, or reframe, the next 10 years are so critical. It's so critical for us to focus on this right now. And then that understanding about what's good for Black women being good for all society. So understanding that, and how do we communicate that more effectively for people to grasp that. Thank you so much for that. Jackie, same question. Why is it so important to be having this conversation, and what is it we deserve? And you're on mute, Jackie.
Nothing new there. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with Michelle and Angela. I'm absolutely honored. You know, I want to acknowledge how radical your preamble is, and your concept of the future we deserve. It's radical. It's outside, and part of your question was about how we reach the pinnacle of equity, freedom, and well-being. And I think well-being is first. Well-being is first. We have to be here. We have to be strong. We have to be alive and going, right? Equity, yeah, sure, obvious. That's obvious. I want to focus on freedom, liberation. Like, that word is crazy big. Freedom? Like, what are you asking? What are you demanding? To stop the social control of Black women, telling us what to do, where to go, how to be, who to be with, where we can be in time and space. Stop doing that. Stop trying to control us. See us. Stop the invisibility that is that is like, we're expected to be invisible. People take for granted that we will do all of the things that the poem that Angela read, that we'll do all of those things in the background, behind the curtain, just like, sort of like, you know, in the back. So that invisibility, we need to stop that. That's what a demand for freedom. The word liberation keeps coming to me, right? That's what a demand for freedom would call for, is to get rid of that invisibility. And then finally, the demand for a relief from the burden of oppression. Like we're doing all that, being all this, running everything in the ways that Angela described in her in that poem, doing all of that under the pressure and the weight of oppression. So freedom, if just think, that's a big thing. Freedom is not that's what the country supposedly was founded on, freedom. So people take for granted that not only that we don't deserve it, but that we won't ask for it. We've become accustomed, everybody, we've all, and in this society where the ways we respond to Black women is, oh, poor thing, let me help you. Let me take care of the things you need. Let me give you this, let me give you that. So taking for granted that just giving us equity and just giving us well-being, which are just the regular stuff of humanity, is enough. But no, you all are demanding that we deserve freedom. That's big. And I'm happy to be in it with you all.
Thank you so much. Again, if you haven't had the opportunity, please visit our website, download the preamble, claim these things for yourself, understanding what it is we're talking about, freedom. We're talking about liberation. We're talking about demanding it. Now is the time. We have the power. Thank you so much, Jackie. All right, so we're going to head back up to you, Angela. How have you collaborated or mobilized Black women in policy work, and why is this so important?
Yeah, so before I go to that question, I just kind of want to riff off of what Jackie was talking about in terms of freedom, if that's okay with you, Aaliyah.
Go ahead now, riff. Go ahead.
All right. So this notion of freedom is so, it was resonating in my body so much is because of, in addition to wanting to live into that freedom, what does it feel like to actually be free in our own bodies? So I saw a painting recently. So the YWCA Racial Justice Summit is next week. Shout out to Vanessa and Alice Traore. Alice Traore is doing an incredible piece of art for the summit. And I saw it, and it was literally a Black woman resting on the ground. And when I saw it, I literally burst out in tears, had to turn my camera off because a Black woman resting on the ground seemed like science fiction to me. I'm like, that, what you just depicted in this piece of art isn't real. That can't be possible. I can't go somewhere and just rest, you know? So understanding what it feels like to own my body and feel free in my own body and not be hyper vigilant to everything that's going around me. Some people know that I'm a Black woman that loves Wisconsin, and I love to go out in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, and just chill. But that notion of I'm a Black woman going out in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, what does it look like for me to chill? I still have to have some vigilance. So that notion of freedom, I don't want it to be science fiction anymore. Even before I live in a quote unquote free society, I want to feel what it feels like to be free in my own body, and knowing that me being free in my own body is going to be a threat to others, and I have to not care about it. What was your question? Sorry.
Well, you threw me off too, because that freedom in our own bodies before we can be free in spaces. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. The question was just about the work that you've done around mobilizing Black women around policy work, and why is it important? But thank you for looking off that first.
So a little bit of my genesis story in terms of how I got to embrace Black women's health. So my mom was diagnosed with lupus when she was pregnant with me. So my mom grew up in and out of the hospital with lupus and some mental health challenges. So I had a kind of firsthand view of that, and I got very interested in medicine and health. Have always been interested in health. And in college, I was pre-med, like so many folks, pre-med. And in between my sophomore and junior year of college, I had the opportunity to intern at the state health department. And it was specifically looking at breast cancer mortality among Black women. So I interned with Gail Johnson at the health department and realized that I was far more interested in policy and epidemiology instead of being around sick people. It turns out I actually don't like being around sick people. If I was going to become a doctor, I would need to be a pathologist because I just don't like being around sick people. But I did like the power of data and how it can be used for policy. And in preparation for this panel, I went back and looked. I had forgotten that my very first paper that I ever published in the Wisconsin Medical Journal in 1999 was on what was it called? The increasing gap in breast cancer mortality between Black and white women from 1979 to 1996. We are still talking about the same thing. In that same span, and I had forgotten about this, the breast cancer mortality had declined for white women, but had increased for Black women, both Wisconsin and nationally. So to me, that's how I got started. I ended up going to grad school to focus in on epidemiology. At the time, I worked at the Center for the Study of Cultural Diversity in Healthcare in the med school. That place no longer exists. And then I've done a variety of things throughout my career, but one of the main things that we know is that community economic and financial well-being is a key driver to overall health. So for me, being in the financial services industry, I see what I do as completely linked to the overall well-being of historically marginalized communities. And the social determinants of health model drives what I do day in and day out. And we can talk more about that another time.
Thank you. I just want to hit that one point. We are still discussing the same thing. We are still discussing the same thing. Now is the time to change that. We must demand this change right now, and we must mobilize ourselves. And that's what we're doing here today. And that's what you guys are leading the work in doing. Thank you so much. All right, Michelle. So talking about, again, just how we're mobilizing or bringing women together around this work, around the social determinants of health, as Angela talked about, which of course is policy work. Why is that so important? And talk about how you've done it.
So like Angela, I have a similar story of growing up with a mom battling autoimmune diseases. My mom had rheumatoid arthritis, had periods of extreme flare-ups that made her at times disabled, unable to work, unable to do things around the house, unable to fully care for her children. Unfortunately, my mom inevitably passed from an autoimmune disease also, but one that she had not been diagnosed with previously, up until she ended up in a hospital and started hemorrhaging from her lungs. My mom experience in ICU over a 6 weeks period was life-defining for me. But what was more life-defining was what happened in the next 6 weeks. So a month out after my mom passed, my mom's sister passed, my Aunt Pearlie Mae, and she passed also from an autoimmune disease. My Aunt Pearlie Mae rode with me in the car to her sister's funeral. So we're talking about weeks of change. And one of the things that was really sharp was the difference in my aunt's experience in the hospital versus my mom. My mom lived in Houston, Texas. My dad's a brick mason. We had union privatized health insurance. And so over the 6 weeks while my mom was in the ICU, they literally threw every cocktail that they could come up with. I mean, literally experimental drugs, things that were really pricey. They put it on, they were willing to try whatever to try to sustain her life. It didn't work, but they did try. In contrast, my Aunt Pearlie Mae, after a week of being in ICU, me and my sister were literally racing to Louisiana when we got the call, and they told us they weren't going to even keep her on life support. They were pulling the cord. So we had to say goodbye to her as we were driving. And of course, there's lots of differences in sort of the difference in rurality and versus an urban city, the differences in the development that Louisiana has made versus Texas, but the other pieces about access. My aunt only had access to public healthcare, and that shouldn't matter. It should not matter whether you have private insurance or you have public insurance. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve to show up in a medical emergency and get the best healthcare access that we can receive. And so for me, these lived experiences really shaped my intellectual lens. I knew that at the root of all of these things were systems, the policies, the decisions that people are making. Like none of this that we're dealing with is just by coincidence. People have made choices. We have created this social structure, and it's that way because we allow it to be. And so as a sociologist, I knew that focusing only on the outcome of this was not really getting to the root of it. I knew that when I wanted to understand how my family's destiny ended up here, why do we have such a burden of certain types of health outcomes? I know I can't take away the fact that my mom literally picked cotton as a kid, that she is a sharecropper, that they grew up in abject poverty. I know that when we're talking about addressing health and to create a world where people are able to be well, we have to address those root causes, whether it is our economic structure, whether it is education, community, whether it is our government. We have to address all of those pieces. And so that's really been the motivation of my work. And I have tried to tap myself or put myself into positions where I can either do work around education. So the work with race equity, which is really about framing, right? It's really about amplifying a story that was already present, but needed additional amplification in order for decision makers and systems to be responsive to it. And as a worker in the state, one of the reasons why I took this role it rackens back to one of a comment an earlier presenter talked about, which is like the importance of understanding the systems that we are at war with. For me, I know that government is both super important, it is critical, and it also has been designed and shaped in a way that helps facilitate and produce the outcomes that we're all managing and dealing with. And so for me, part of making the decision to shift from my previous work and step into the roles that I am in now has been wanting to deepen my own understanding of how these systems work, how decisions get made, what the levers of power are, and to be able to translate that information to people who I work with outside of that agency, because it's about that collective empowerment, that knowledge building, so that we can work collaboratively and collectively together in order to push these systems forward.
I just want to thank you. I just want to pause for a moment. You know, we've been in this day and we've been talking about these things. And we're talking about ourselves, and I just want to shout out the chat. We're talking about our mothers, we're talking about our grandmothers, our daughters, our great granddaughters, and Lisa said in the previous panel, quoting Bell Hooks, "The personal is political," and we're all driven to this work. Mine from heart failure at 26 and pregnancy, and just want to honor, and of course Lisa from the beautiful woman that sits behind me. So I just want to honor the stories that we're sharing. And why it's so relevant. I mean, we're demanding this because we're demanding this for ourselves and for all those people. So I want to name that as we're going through that there's some personal hurt and pain around this work as well as we're shaping this. But that's why we're the experts, because we know firsthand and we know from the places in which we're situated in our education how to co-create these solutions. So thank you. So I'm going to pass it to you, Jackie, as well. Again, just talking about this work. Why is it important? How have you collaborated or mobilized other women in this work?
So, you know, I can start by following the lead of Angela and Michelle, thinking about my family. My mother is one of 10 children, and 5 sisters and 4 brothers. And I can remember my mother is in her 80s. And I can remember each one of her sisters had hysterectomies when they were younger, you know, in their 20s and 30s. And I, you know, even then we knew that it was just sort of a conveyor belt of Black women just being opened up and moved around in ways that, you know, was just sort of willy-nilly or not very thoughtful. But each and every one of her sisters went through this. And so when I was moved toward education because my mind just kind of works in this way of, I don't understand. Like I never understood injustice. I just like on a bottom line level, I never understood why everybody thinks it's okay, why we live with it every day. I'm now 65 years old and it's still just a normal everyday thing after all of these many years. So I've seen a lot. And so when I I went to law school, I didn't start out in policy, but I just found myself complaining about systems of power and disregard and neglect. And I just found myself talking about them all the time. And somebody, would hear me talk and say, hey, come over here and say that. And then, sort of that became my work. And so when I did that, when it became my work and I focused on social welfare policy, and I was focused on low-income men, in social welfare systems. But I knew that in order to learn, what I had to do was go to Black women. In order to learn what I wanted to know, I had to go to, sort of to your point, Angela, about that's where you go to get, that's the oracle. That's where you go to get the information. And so I would go to them and say, these are some policies they're thinking about doing it. Women in social welfare agencies, women in, peer support groups, women in, all kinds of places and spaces where they had gone for help and support of themselves and their children and their families. Because I would tell policymakers, I'm not going to talk about this or think about this or write about this without first going and talking to those women and asking them. And I didn't go ask them necessarily only what's going on in your life. I would go and say, here's the policy they're suggesting. What's your analysis of this policy? That's the way I would ask the question in the focus group. And they had the answers. Every time they had the answers. And when I was doing that, I felt them and that my whole family, I said that my mother had 9 sisters and brothers. And I'm very close to all of the descendants of those 9 sisters and brothers. We are over 200 now. And I just came back a couple of weeks ago from one of the many, many, many family reunions we have every year. And I see it, right, in every family member. And because I happen to sit around in colleges a few times and get college degrees a couple of times, I have health care and I have, some of the things that I need. But I have lots of family members who do not. I have lots of family members still who do not. Younger than me, family members younger than me, nieces and second cousins and folks that I see struggling. So it's not an academic exercise for me to think about about Black women, because my family, we always have girls. We always have girls. Of those 200 people, we're about 125 girls, or maybe even more, maybe 150. I mean, we are just a girl family. And so I see Black women at all ages and little baby, beautiful new baby girls coming into the world. And it just still doesn't make sense to me. And so I spend my time, I guess because I come in the right package, and with the right credentials, I spend my time relaying the information that I get from the Black women in my family and the Black women that I talk to in my work, and my mother, directly from her and her still living sisters. I spend my time bringing that information, putting it on paper, talking to new soon to be social worker, young white women who are going to be social workers and, have had contact with my nieces and my aunts and my, trying to express these demands that you all are making today, trying to express those demands in all the different ways that I can express them on paper and with words.
Thank you, all three of you. I just know that as you are talking, people are resonating and thinking about and meditating on their own families and their own experience, and how, maybe how much more accessible this idea of policy work is, because it's out of our expertise from experience, that we are forced into these places, and understanding that our lived experience and our education together, again, puts us in a place where we are best able to inform policy. So I just want to name what's happening here. And I just really want to take a deep dive. Each of you kind of began to do this in terms of positioning your answers not only in your personal experience, but also in the role that you sit in so powerfully within organizations, educational systems, consulting, etc. So I want to begin with you, Angela, in your role as VP for DEI at CUNA Mutual Group and Foundation. And as we all know, CUNA Mutual is a financial services institution. But we also know that you have this very diverse background in public health. And we also know that you happen to be the creator of the Black Oxygen podcast, and you wear a number of hats, Angela. But can you talk about that public health background in particular, and your familiarity with the needs of Black women, just in thinking of the conversations, the hundreds of conversations you host and you sit with Black women, how it informs your approach to the financial sector, to the work that you do at CUNA?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about something called the bar high model. But before I go there, I just want to kind of share a quote that was kind of bubbling up for me during this conversation. And it's something that I heard yesterday, like literally yesterday in a conversation. Because when we think about policy work, and then we just think about our interpersonal work and how our interpersonal work is planting seeds on a regular basis. And this disability justice and racial justice rights worker said to me, we have internalized the state. Just like we can internalize racism, each one of us has internalized a state, and we have started policing each other. And I'm like, well, damn, I need to do some work, right? So as we think about policy, how have we internalized the state in creating community with each other as Black women, right? Like, oh, I want to sit with that. So that's just something that's been bubbling up with me, because if we really want to get to that notion of freedom and liberation in a way that's cosmic beyond what we know right now, that means we can't use the master's tools, quoting Audre Lorde. And the master's tools so much have come from us internalizing the state. So I don't know what to do with that. It's just something that's on my mind. So in terms of how I connect my background of public health and policy to the work that we do at CUNA Mutual, I think of it as this thing called the bar high model. Bar high model is the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative. Sorry, I'm going a little nerdy for just a second. Aaliyah, you're like, yeah, you're going real nerdy. And so my background in public health, when I started in public health years and years ago, we would be looking at downstream impacts, looking at disparities of mortality. So you peel the onion a little bit back further, and you can think of disparities in chronic disease, which lead to disparities in mortality. Present day example of that is COVID. So we know that Black folks and Latinx folks are dying at a higher rate. Lots of times the higher rate was due to differences in chronic disease prevalence. So peel that onion a little bit back further. Sometimes for many years in public health, we would focus on health behaviors. Well, if you just ate right, if you just did this differently, if you just did this, it was all individual, personal responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, why are your pants sagging type of public health messaging. And that's where it stood for a long time. But it's on us to peel the onion a little bit further back to understand how our economic system, how our corporations, how our government have all connected back to the behaviors which lead to different outcomes over time. That makes sense so far? So for example, an example would be redlining. Redlining has created neighborhoods that are more invested in than others, and redlining was done based on the basis of race. So if you're in a historically redlined neighborhood, you have not been able to accumulate wealth over time. The schools that you have access to are different. The healthcare aspects of things that are different. And then access to green spaces. So people are saying work out, work out, work out, work out. But if you don't have a safe green space to work out in, you're not going to be able to do that. So redlining is a clear example of how the system has impacted downstream impacts. Now, if you peel that onion a little bit further back, it's each one of us in the institutions that we are located in, whether it's corporation like me at CUNA Mutual Group, whether as when I was in government or academia or at the public health department, each of those institutions have a role to play in all of those downstream impacts. So if I think about creating health among our communities of color, I have to go in with the lens that CUNA Mutual has a role to play at a national level in terms of the products and services that we create and provide to people all throughout the nation. And when we think about our institutions, it's up to us to think about what are the biases that we're bringing into the space that create, I'm going to use a bad word, bullshit products and services for folks. Because so many times, and I love CUNA Mutual Group. I freaking love CUNA Mutual Group. But if we are only creating products and services with a lens towards white middle class folks, that's not it. And that's not going to meet the name. That's not even going to meet our business needs based on the changing demographic. But that is not going to lead to long-term health and well-being for folks of color. So that's the lens that I try to bring into the work on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much. I felt like I was in public health again, public health class. We just had a master's level education right there. CUNA Mutual Group is so lucky to have you and to be able to offer that framing to the organization as well. Michelle, you are the Director of Office of the Inspector General for the Wisconsin Department of Children and Family Services and the Systems Change Research Policy Officer there as well. We're going to have to talk about how you manage all these jobs. More than a decade of experience in this role as a research, policy evaluation expert, and scholar. Can you tell me or tell us how your cumulative experience as a research and evaluator specifically influenced the work you do at DCF?
Yeah, so just a quick little bit of background to make sure everyone sort of understands what the Inspector General Office is. So basically, the Inspector General Office is a tool of oversight for government. So when we talk about who polices the government, well, that's the OIG. And so as an OIG, I get to lead a team who are concerned about the ways in which our programs are actually producing the results that that's intended. So are the programs effective? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Are we working and using the resources and the dollars and the programmatic authorities and oversights that we have in order to ensure that our programs are efficient, that they're effective, that they make sense? And I have a wonderful team who has really embraced doing this work with a explicit equity lens, looking at the ways in which we need to consider how difference, whether it's race or economic status or gender or sexuality or ability, interface how we define effective or how we define efficient. And on my other hat, which is really sort of a global sort of equity, sort of health equity hat, I get to sort of really lead the conversation in my agency around what it means to position and see ourselves as a health equity player. So I am in the human services as opposed to the health services, and the programs that that are administered by my agency are critical for supporting and creating infrastructure to advance health equity. Things like economic security, programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which we know literally lifts people out of poverty every year. We have things like our early care and education, our Wisconsin Shares subsidy. And we also have programs that we know can cause harm, like our child welfare system and child support system. And so it's really critical for us to begin thinking about our work because government is designed. Like one of the things to really think about is government. What government, we can critique it, but typically what government is most comfortable with doing is addressing problems. And so it's very hard for government to understand itself and its role as preventing problems. And that's evidence. I think Dr. Jones may have referenced it. I think someone referenced like the amount of money we put towards outcomes versus prevention dollars, right? And so a part of the power and the beauty of being able to step into this role and really kind of interface with my agency in the first way of helping it understand its role has been doing that molding and that education and that redefining of the why is our work important, because we know that the way we frame questions matters for the types of answers we end up pursuing, how we pursue those questions. And so being able to see ourselves as health equity instead of trying to address a problem like, well, poor people need to work and they need someone to take care of their kids while they're working. Like that leads to a different outcome than saying, hey, actually supporting families. Childcare is really expensive. Supporting economic security of families means finding ways to subsidize and make sure that people have access to good quality early care and education, that their children are in safe, enriching, culturally supportive and congruent environments, and that they're not going broke doing it. And so as a researcher and an evaluator, I am a scientist. I am unapologetically a scientist. And I feel like in this present moment, I've become more radicalized as a scientist because there is so much tension around what is science and what does science tell us and what it can't tell us. And the reality is that the fears, the distrust around science is righteous. It's justified. It's situated in history and all of those things. But there's a lot of miseducation and undereducation that then leads us to coming to conclusions that actually reinforce oppression, that actually harms us and puts us in positions that are not going to lead us towards the vision, to that utopia. And so for me, the way in which I use research and evaluation in my space is that I understand that methodologies are methodologies and there's strengths and weaknesses of them. And so being able to understand how an approach to a question limits what we can understand about that question, how it eliminates certain voices, certain perspectives, how it paints a incomplete picture. Mind you, I want to point out that I have not said that they were wrong, right? I didn't say that they were wrong. I said it was incomplete. And so it's really important for us and for me, and the way I use my role is really challenging and unpacking out the questions we pack, how we approach answering those questions, and then the interpretations we make from the information that we gather. There is almost 340 million people in the United States. I think I calculated a statistic. If we were to have someone meet one new person in the US every second, one new person every second, it would take 10.5 years to meet everybody in the US. And that is one of the reasons why science and research is really important, because while science and research is not designed to tell you specifically individual about what's best for you or what's right for you, we know that there are some universal things. We know people need to not be hungry. We know people need to feel safety. We know people need to have the means to meet their needs. And what science allows us to do is to ask and answer questions about how we can do that best in a way to most effectively serve large populations, which is what we're dealing with, what we're dealing with at the scale of government.
Woo! I hope you guys are catching what I'm laying down in the chat right there. I hope you're listening to the positionality of these women in these organizations working this inside game. But not only that, but their framing and expertise that they're bringing to it that are shaping and changing the system itself. So what we hear them doing is not just having a perspective, but training up teams and changing internal policies and practices that are going to promote something different for us. So I hope you're catching that we're not just talking about their titles because they're cool and they're long and they're, interesting and you want to hear more, which is true. But we're talking about this because they're offering something different to these organizations. So we're going to do a little bit of a pivot right here because we've been talking about this insider's perspective of changing systems from within. And Jackie, I really want to talk about your work, kind of as an outsider, as a consultant with many of these agencies locally and nationally. So you're a member director at a multiracial woman-led organization, the NINA Collective. You're also a social justice educator and lecturer at the School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You're an attorney by training. You have all these, past experiences leading the Center for Family Policy for years, decades again of research on welfare and child support policy. Can you talk about your analysis and public policy background and your familiarity with the health needs of Black women and how that background informs the work that you do in higher education as a consultant, as a scholar?
So I guess I would start by saying that I am totally here for the historical perspective and the from Angela and the scientific research perspective from Michelle. And I'll just stick with sort of jump on the nerdy train and say that my perspective is theoretical. And I know that sounds like a bad word. I know that sounds like a bad word. It sounds like a thing that's not helping because it's up here. But the way I think of this is from a person that I read a lot and I have come to really learn a lot from, which is Patricia Hill Collins. And she's an academic and there are three things that I have pulled from her, and she's written a book on each one of these things, but one is systems of power, right? Like how the systems of gender and class and race and how Black women are, right, situated right at the intersection of all those things, class and race and gender. So there's those systems of power. She wrote another one, and another focus she has is on intellectual activism, how this creation, this activism that is based on the theoretical is important. And then finally, and most importantly, is her work on Black feminist thought. And any place and space that I get a chance to talk about it, I do. And so I went and looked for how she defines Black feminist thought. And this is a theory, like this is an intellectual theory. This is not, I got a bunch of girlfriends and this is how we think. This is a theory, an academic theory, Black feminist thought. And here's how she defines it. And then I want to break it down a little bit. And then I hope kind of that I'm answering your question, Leah. But I want to break it down a little bit. So Black feminist thought is self-defined knowledge. Now that's important. Self-defined. We decided that this is new knowledge for the world. Self-defined knowledge produced, and we produced it. So we produced a whole new area of thought, right? To conceptualize our experience in the United States since our ancestors were brought here, drugged here across the ocean from Africa. So we have created a new knowledge based on those experiences and the ones that are fallout from those experiences. And we don't just sit around theorizing about it. Black feminist thought includes using that knowledge to take action, right? So for me, this idea that we have an experience and a body of knowledge that we can use to change our world and to change the world. You said it earlier, Michelle. I think it was you that said that our survival, our thriving, the rest of society depends on that. And until we get in those positions, the world is missing out on our gifts and all of the things that we have to give. And one of them is our way of knowing and creating these ways of knowledge and these knowledges that other people don't have and that we're bringing into the room. And so I just wrap up by saying that's maybe surreptitiously undercover what I'm doing in all the work that I do. That's what I'm doing in the classroom. That's what I'm doing at NINA. And, I may be smiling and saying the words that people are used to hearing, but mostly I'm just passing on Black feminist thought. I'm just, that's what's going to save us. That's what's going to take us where we need to go. And I'm just trying to get it into people's heads because you know why? Because Black women demand, Black women deserve, and we get ready to get it. So I'm just kind of preparing people. Sometimes I feel sorry for people because we coming, right? And so I'm just trying to have people get their head right before we get there. I just do that and then they give me a check.
Woo! Black women demand, Black women deserve. Somebody hashtag that today. I know that Lisa put in the chat, Black women leading the way. And that is going to perfect pivot into our next question. We'll start with Jackie and work our way back that way. Black women are leading and excelling. Just listen to this panel and moving into roles of power at incredible rates. So you all and others as well. We are getting important things done and doing so boldly. Okay. What excites you most about this trajectory of Black women in Wisconsin and beyond Wisconsin as well? Jackie, we'll begin with you.
I am most excited about, I'm most excited about us learning from each other and using it to change the world. I'm most excited about our conversations where we get to feel each other and know each other, Black women, and then using what we learn and know. And then I'm so excited about the power, the joy, the beauty, all of those things of Black women and all the things we do. And it's just on you all, the existence of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. I'm just excited about us coming together and just telling folk about themselves.
Thank you, Jackie. Passing the mic to you, Michelle. What about you? What excites you most about this trajectory for Black women in Wisconsin and beyond Wisconsin as well?
I'm going to have to echo what Miss Jackie said. I think that, I don't know, I grew up in a predominantly Black space. Like, I was around Black people all the time. And I just struggle with the fact that I know, because of these systems we have in place, the brilliance that we have is often not in the places that it should be. And so for me, this unleashing or, us pushing and demanding and struggle, our persistence in getting access to these spaces, for me, is like the potential of the future of thinking differently, of creating new ways of understanding what the world can exist and look like. Because I think right now we're narrow, it's so narrow, right? Like we there's so much focus on sort of like white logic, right? White people did it this way, or white, like the reality is we've seen what they've done. We exist in it, and we know it's not enough. So if we're going to get to that new place, to that utopia, like, we have to create a whole new way of understanding what liberation and transformation looks like. And I think that we're on the cusp of that. I think that Black women have the power to do that work.
Yes, we have the power. Now from you, Angela, why are you so excited right now?
For a lot of things, and I was just jotting down some notes. A couple of things that is bubbling up for me. One is, I think that we have the power to continue to amplify the voice of the Black woman. I kind of reject the notion that this is new knowledge. I think that this is knowledge that we've had all along, and we have the opportunity to create new spaces where it's amplified. I never want to dismiss the knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors, right? So what I'm most excited about is collective generational healing. That's the thing that comes up for me. So Myra McNair, on an episode of Black Oxygen, she said that just like trauma can be passed down, so can healing. So what does it look like for us to collectively heal together? I'm so excited that we are at the tables, but I don't want us to be exploited, right? So how can we embody and know who we are, but know our boundaries and communicate them? And that's something that I'm terrible at. So this notion of how do I become a bridge back to my own self, that's something that I'm learning. Last year, I burnt out. And if I'm being honest, I'm still burnt out. Not as burnt out as I was last year, but I burnt out. And so Madison is really a seductive place to, like, oh, you're a Black woman, I need you on this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And there's a seduction to say yes to all of the things. It makes me feel good. And then I realize I can't do all the things and take care of myself and take care of my kids and be there for my family and friends. And so how can we be a bridge back to ourselves so we don't get distracted by the BS, that we can hold ourselves in integrity and leave from a place of our inner knowing and integrity, as opposed to repeating the trauma of exploitation. So that's what I'm excited about.
Ooh, and I'm excited about that truth that you just dropped. And I'm hoping, again, that people are sharing in their social media some of these nuggets. Just like trauma can be passed down, so can healing. Mic drop. We're going to close this panel with just a quick response from you all on how do we claim our power to build this future that we deserve? How do we create that new reality? Quick thoughts on that before we have to end. We'll begin with you, Jackie.
I'm just going to say again about the demanding freedom. I mean, that's the way to get there. People will hear it if we keep demanding, and if the thing we're demanding is freedom.
I'm going to jump on the demand and quote Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did it, and it never will. So we have to keep pushing. Struggle is essential to our liberation.
And I would say just get quiet and hear your own inner wisdom. You know, it's there. Despite all of the BS and noise that's around us, get quiet and be selective about who you have in your circle, because there's a lot of nonsense out there. You don't want to pick up on that negative energy that doesn't lead to forward movement.
We heard a whole word today, everyone. Thank you so much to our guests. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for sharing both your personal and professional expertise. I knew this panel was going to be fire, and it was. I definitely was not disappointed. So I appreciate that. And now we are going to get out of our chairs again and get moving. Everyone, please head over to the DJ booth for Vanessa McDowell, aka DJ Ace, and we will see you back on the main stage at 3 p.m. sharp.